They were out early one morning, panning in the stream for gold, surrounded by the rising mountains. Old prospector with a tale for two, he brushed around in the pan, and pointing out what lay within was ordinary sand. He began with a story about 20 years before, and a younger man who sought his fortune. With a tear or two he told of searching for his treasure, but making known the gold he sought was ordinary pleasure. There were years of doing without, and there were years of plenty. He started thinking that life was never steady, excepting when the bills came in and he had no money to pay. Whiskey had never tasted better ordinarily. Concluded his story as it filled the air with a laugh, saying how he found the Lord and Savior, and how he found the river of life by which his day unfolds, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold.
Welcome to True North Studio. My name is Mark Wallace, and with me today is my lovely wife, Josephine. And we appreciate all of you who tune in with us, whether you're in the studio here, on the live stream, or listening later in the week. Welcome. And today we're going to be doing something a bit different. My wife and I are going to talk through the time the freshly resurrected Christ interviewed two people on the beautiful road to Emmaus. And you're going to see there was a pretty big reason Jesus appeared to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And there's a reason the resurrected Christ spent over an hour with this couple before he ever appeared to his own trusted apostle. Now, what was that reason? Why did he appear to these people before he even appeared to the apostles? Now, most of the dialogue that I'm going to go from is from Luke chapter 24. And now, our interview with the risen Christ. Hello, my name is Cleopas, and with me here is my lovely wife, Mary.
Hello there.
And you may know us as the two disciples who walked with the newly resurrected Christ from Jerusalem to our second home in Emmaus. And as you know, at that time, we had no idea it was Jesus. And here's something to consider. On the day of his resurrection, Jesus appeared 5 times in 5 different outfits to 5 different groups. Why did he, disguised as a traveler, spend almost 2 hours with me and Mary? Why? Why not spend that once in the universe time with his apostles? Why not spend that time with his mom or family? Why us? Why Mary and me? There had to be a reason. We aren't apostles, although our son James was. We aren't related to Jesus, but we know his mom quite well. So why did the freshly resurrected Christ spend so much time with us on this super special of all days? Why us? Well, you may be surprised with the answer, or the answers. Before we get fully into the interview, you may want to know that Jesus and all but one of the apostles and most of the ladies that we're going to mention in this little talk are all from the Galilee area.
We are all from small towns around Galilee, and you know how it goes in small towns. Everybody knows everybody and everything about each other. That can be both good and bad. As the kids were growing up, our families would attend local feasts together, spend days and days walking and talking to attend the major feast at Jerusalem.
Going to Jerusalem was about a 70-mile, 3-day trip each way, walking. And the kids would play. You'd go in a huge group, and the kids would play, and adults would talk and catch up with the people they liked on gossip. And see, we weren't strangers with anybody from that area. We did business together. We hung out together, and everybody took care of everybody. Now, financially, Mary and I have done pretty well for ourselves over the years. God's been good. And this has given us the means to help support our son, the other apostles, and of course, Jesus as he crisscrossed Israel, speaking the word and walking with power. Now, Mary here had just trekked 150 miles on foot with Jesus and the boys up to Galilee and then back down to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. And the entourage, the group of people, would grow with every single miracle that Jesus Christ did. It was getting crazy.
I got to hang out with the Master on a daily basis and got to see firsthand Jesus doing miracle after miracle. Plus, I was able to spend a couple of weeks with our son James and his apostle buddies. We were planning to meet up for a mini reunion in Jerusalem for Passover this year, but things didn't go as planned.
Well, what started out as a fun, exciting, and hopeful year turned deadly as the group returned to Jerusalem. Needless to say, it had been a crazy few days. But my highlight, my zenith, the greatest day of my life, our life, was our interview with the risen Christ. Imagine? Imagine? Another thing to note, you got to remember that Jesus was so popular in Jerusalem that even people who weren't from Israel had heard of him. Romans did, soldiers did, Greek-speaking converts did. Even most of the travelers, when they came to town, had heard the amazing stories of Jesus' healings, raising people from the dead, miracle feedings, the walking on water. Everybody knew Jesus was in town. Everybody. So if I've told this story once, I've told it 1,000 times, so bear with me. Those of you who are fortunate enough to have a copy of young Dr. Luke's inspired writings, find the section in your scrolls that talk about our trip to Emmaus. In modern scrolls, it's Luke chapter 24:13. Now, we made a little money over the years, so we also have a little place, a second home, in a beautiful little lush suburb of Jerusalem called Emmaus. And there's 3 towns named Emmaus in Israel, believe it or not. We lived in the one closest to Jerusalem. our Emmaus became a tax-free Roman colony. Rome did it to tempt the occupying Roman soldiers into staying in Israel after their tour of duty to continue an occupation without pay. You know, that famous historian fellow you may have heard of named Josephus, he wrote that Emmaus was a 60 stadia round trip. Now, if you don't know what a stadia was a standard length of the chariot tracks at stadiums. So 60 stadiums is about 7 miles. Okay, so lush little Emmaus was only a little over 3.5 miles away, one way. That's 5.5 kilometers, 5.5 clicks from Jerusalem. You know, maybe just about an hour or so walk each way. Not bad. It was pretty close. Now, when Mary and I came to Jerusalem for the feasts and reunions, we'd stay at our place in Emmaus. And after the day's events at Jerusalem, we'd walk home for supper, spend the night, and go back to town the next day. A lot of people did that. So after these past 3 crazy emotional days, Mary and I leave the noise and confusion of Jerusalem behind and are walking back to our quiet little place right off the road in beautiful, beautiful Emmaus. The problem is, big problem, my lovely wife, Mary, was not too happy with me for 3 main reasons. 1, because we left our son and the apostles and all her friends while everyone was still grieving over the death of Jesus. 2, because all the apostles, including our son, told the women, including his mom and my wife, that they were crazy for saying that they'd seen angels and seen the risen Christ. And 3, because I didn't believe my Mary, and I didn't defend her. So up to that point of the interview, not a single man, not an apostle, husband, or father had seen the risen Christ, much less an angel. All the women said they saw both. We didn't believe them. Trust me, we did not believe the ladies. So, like the stubborn fool I am, I told Mary, enough is enough. Let's call it a day. We're heading home.
This is where the fight/interview began. Ladies, I'm sure that none of you have ever had your husbands tell you to calm down and stop being so emotional. Don't you love that? I bet none of you ladies have ever been hurried out of a party or social event or rushed out of a family gathering before you were ready to go because your big, strong man said it was time to go. Welcome to my world.
Well, here's some background as to what got my Mary so peeved with me not believing her. Well, my wife had been traveling with Jesus and the apostle boys off and on for the better part of a year. A year. We gave money, lots of money, and supplies to help Jesus and the boys. A lot of people did that. Now, my Mary, like a few other ladies, helped in any way she could. My Mary was involved, really involved. Plus, like I said before, our son James was one of the 12 apostles, which is why we had backstage access to Jesus. My Mary loved and respected Jesus with all of her heart and loved spending time with our son James. Especially, she thought she needed to be there, especially when things started going sideways. And she had seen miraculous healings, seen lives changed instantly and forever. Blind men could now see. Jesus and Peter walked on water. Storms were stopped. Fish were caught. Thousands were fed miraculously twice. You know, at least 3 people were raised from the dead over that past year. One of them just recently, and we all knew him, that young man who's named Lazarus. That wealthy young man who was a real close friend of Jesus's had been dead in the grave for 4 days, and Jesus healed that guy. He came walking out of that tomb like one of those Egyptian mummies. You know, like he was wrapped in grave clothes, smothered with 75 pounds of super expensive spices. It was a sight to see, folks. Wow. It was crazy. And everybody in town knew about this. The religious leaders wanted to kill Lazarus just like they wanted to kill Jesus. You know, it makes me think if you can be healed of that fatal disease called death, You can be healed of anything. Yet I digress. Now, my Mary was angry with me because after all the miracles she'd seen and talked about over the past year, I did not believe that she had seen an angel, and I surely did not believe that she saw the risen Jesus Christ. Neither did any the other men, not the apostles, not our son. Nobody believed the ladies. So we said our goodbyes, Mary and I, and we left the rented room that our son and the other apostles were staying in, and we wound our way through the noisy, dusty, crowded streets of Jerusalem and walked out the western gate straight into the sun. And it had been a crazy, confusing day, but it was sort of nice to be going home, at least for me. Now, Jerusalem was set up on a hill, and so in the afternoon, the view heading west out of Emmaus at that time of year was breathtaking. It was just always was. And we started walking down this wide, paved Roman road, and the trees were already in full leaf there. And the road dropped softly, into the valley like a song, and the sun made us squint. You see, and once we were 100 yards, maybe a stadia away from Jerusalem, and had managed to separate ourselves from the other travelers, we went at it. Really, she went at it. Now, I was angry that Mary had embarrassed me and our son back there in front of the apostles for saying she thought she had seen angels and thought she had seen the risen Christ. I didn't believe a word of it, but neither did any of the other men. None of us believed him.
I was none too happy with you either, Cleopas, because you didn't believe me. We were having one of those low voice, act like you're not having a fight type of fights.
We're going over the past 4 days, trying to make sense of things. We also argued, and we were just beginning to get into it with each other, separated from as many people as we could, and then some stranger, some traveler walked right up behind us and started walking with us. Have you ever had someone just walk up to you while you're talking and act like they're part of your group? You know they're listening, so you try to talk a little bit quieter, and that's what happened.
You switched to that coded talk that only good friends, family, and married couples know.
He seemed to listen intently to us for a few minutes, this guy. He was a good listener, and he was smiling, and he was looking at each of us as we talked and walked and argued as privately as we could. Then he started asking us questions, like an interviewer.
Don't you love it when someone you don't even know starts asking you personal questions?
We didn't even realize at the time, but this friendly traveler began to interview us. Why us? Why now? Our interview with the Messiah went something like this. And this is the friendly traveler who walked up to us. Your conversation seems a bit heated and unhappy. Plus, you look both sad and a bit angry at the same time. Mind if I ask you why? That was the guy talking to us. And so, me and Mary think, who the heck is this guy? And why does he care? I ask him, how is it even possible you've been in Jerusalem for the past few days and you don't know what's going on? Everybody knows what's going on. The Judeans know what's going on. The Romans know what's going on. The Greeks know what's going on. You must be the only visitor in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about what's going on. Now the traveler again says, what are you talking about?
He gets us talking. I tell him, what we are talking about is a man named Jesus from Nazareth. He was a mighty prophet who did amazing miracles and did amazing teachings for groups large and small. He was always talking the word. Our chief priests and authorities hated him, were jealous of him, and forced the Romans into crucifying him. They nailed him up on a post on a busy road naked before 4 criminals. They crucified him.
We've been hoping that Jesus was the one, who I'm talking about, the one who would liberate all Israel from Rome. That's what all us guys thought. Anyway, his burial was 3 days ago. His burial. And his disciples and us were crushed. Our son is one of them. Everybody's in deep grief. And if that wasn't enough, earlier today, some of the women in our group, including my Mary here, really shocked us. They went to the tomb early in the morning, but they didn't see his body anywhere. The women came back and told us what they said, what they saw. And they said they saw an angel. And that angel said that Jesus was risen from the dead, that he's alive. Now, do you think we believed him? No. Should we have? Probably. You know, at that point, I think I saw our new traveling companion flash a quick smile.
That's just part of the story. Here's how it really went down. My girlfriends and I, wealthy young Mary Magdalene, Simone, the mother of the other apostle named James, and his loud brother John, Joanna, the wife of Herod's financial guy, and a couple of other ladies were together. We had seen Jesus buried improperly last Wednesday, so we bought spices and were going to go back to the grave site after the weekly Sabbath to bury him the right way. As you know, the Sabbath ended at sundown yesterday, Saturday. So early this morning, we gathered the spices and wrappings and went back to rebury Jesus properly. As we got close, we noticed that someone had already moved the huge stone that covered the tomb and that the guards were gone. It seemed a little bit weird. We looked inside the tomb and there was a handsome young man just sitting there. It didn't make any sense until we realized he was an angel. An angel! He told us Jesus was not there, that he had already risen up. It was a little bit freaky, if you know what I mean. So us ladies hustled back to tell our sons and the other apostles in the rented room. It's hard to believe, but no one believed us. Not our son, not the apostles, not my husband, not anyone. Now, do you understand my frustration?
Hey, hold on a second, Mary. Now Mr. Traveler, I got to add to her story. For the first time, the ladies went to the tomb and were greeted by an angel. One of Jesus' apostles, Peter, and a young man ran to the sepulcher for a look-see. And they only saw the hollow shell of grave clothes like an empty cocoon shape of a human body, but no angel, no Jesus. Now, Peter thought somebody had moved the body, stolen the body, but the young man who was with them believed that Jesus actually rose through the grave wrappings. Now, I don't get it. But the young man actually believed that Jesus, poof, somehow rose from the dead, leaving those burial wrappings behind in the shape of his body. Now, to me, that's unbelievable. Then Peter went back to the rental and told us, because I was there at that time, that the body was gone. But as weird as it sounds, the grave wrappings were just lying there, hollow in the shape of a man. Now, we thought, that's some crazy talk, man.
Well, young Mary Magdalene had followed Peter to the grave, but stood back a bit. We other ladies were a few minutes behind her. We weren't there yet. Peter and the young man left the gravesite and went back to the room. I think we went back to make sure we saw what we saw, because none of the men believed us, and nobody. Like, that's to be called crazy. Now the story gets really good. Before we made it back to the grave, young Mary Magdalene was already there. She told us that Peter left, and she walked up to the open tomb with tears streaming down her face. She said, she stooped down and peeked into the grave, and she saw not one, but two young men, one at the head and one at the feet of the hollow grave clothes. These two angels who looked like men asked her, why is she crying? Even young Mary didn't yet believe that Christ had risen from the dead. She told those two men that she wanted to know where the body was. She asked them point blank. Pretty bold girl, that Mary.
You know, it's hard for me to believe that she didn't ask the men why in the heck they were sitting in an open tomb. That's what gets me. You know, she thought they were men. Why wouldn't she just ask them, what are you doing in there?
Young Mary becomes aware that someone is standing right behind her, sort of like how we felt when you walked up behind us. Someone is standing right behind her and in her comfort zone. So she spins around, still crying, and sees a man dressed in the clothing of a gardener, dressed like the caretaker of the cemetery. He asked her why she was crying, what she was looking for. Mary Magdalene now asks that gardener guy, who you and I know is the resurrected Christ, where he moved the body. Sort of funny. I'm not sure how Jesus can keep a straight face here. He had to be coming out of his skin. This is Jesus' first resurrection appearance, his first experience manipulating his looks. He was incognito. Mary Magdalene turned back toward the tomb, still crying, and Jesus then said her name in that special way that only he said her name. Mary. That moment she recognized his voice. She told us he changed forms again and looked like Jesus did before the beatings and crucifixion. That is the instant Mary Magdalene realized it was Jesus. That was the moment she realized that he had, in fact, risen from the dead. Young Mary Magdalene, one of the most supportive and faithful women over the past year, was the first person on earth to see and believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
Mary, stop filling this traveler's head with nonsense.
Let me finish. Mary Magdalene then reached out to touch Jesus, but he said, "Don't touch me yet, because I still need to ascend." I'm not sure why he said this, because of what was about to happen.
Maybe Jesus was just having fun with her.
Within moments of Jesus in his fleshly resurrected body telling Mary Magdalene not to touch him, me and the other women, Joanna, Simone, a couple of others, walked up on the scene. We saw Mary just standing there, sobbing and staring at our teacher, our friend, our Jesus. What do you do? What do you think we did next? It was him. We older women just fell to our knees and grabbed his legs and feet. He didn't stop us from touching him. We knew it was him, risen from the dead. But he looked great, like regular old normal Jesus. Talk about a beautiful young man. We other ladies were the second to see Jesus in his resurrected body. We also believed. Then in an instant, Jesus disappeared. Mind-blowing. We needed to go back to the rented room, back to our stubborn men, and tell them what just happened. We figured they were going to be so blessed, or so we thought. Surely they would believe us, but it didn't turn out quite the way we expected. As a group, we burst happily into the huge rented room, beaming, radiant smiles on our faces, but all the men were still in that icy fog of grief. We told the men that we actually saw the resurrected Christ. We told them we actually touched the body of Jesus. He looked great. True to form, our son, the apostles, and the other men, including this guy over here, my husband, Cleopas, still didn't believe us. Their unbelief was unbelievable. What's it going to take for these men to believe?
Come on, Mary, why do you keep saying the same story over and over? Haven't we all been through enough? He's gone. Jesus died. He's buried. It's over. Sir, Mr. Traveler, sir, this rising from the dead thing is what we've been bickering about since we left Jerusalem. This he is risen stuff is all the women want to talk about. Hey, I miss him too. I love Jesus, but enough is enough. It just keeps dredging us through this stuff. Now the traveler speaks. Come on, Cleopas. Come on, Mary. Why are you being so five senses? Why are your hearts so sluggish when it comes to believing and being able to understand and communicate what the prophets have been saying all along? Didn't they say things had to happen this way? Didn't the anointed one, the Christ, have to experience all kinds of sufferings before he could finish his work and come into his glory? Sure he did. Because we're all heading to Emmaus. I'm going the same way you are, and since you're already talking about the Christ, I believe you have enough time for me to share with you, from memory, every single scripture concerning the Messiah. Would you like that? Yeah, so starting with Moses and then working through all the prophets, I'm going to share every single verse. Well, he did. For the better part of an hour, he shared from memory, this traveler guy, every single verse that pertained to the Christ. From Moses through the prophets. I'd never seen anything like that before, ever. And it's like he planned it that way. Our best new friend finished reciting the passages that he memorized concerning the Christ. He finished the moment we got to the village of Emmaus, right in front of our house. It was perfect timing. He flat out blew us away. Now, one positive thing was that instead of arguing or weeping or grieving or fighting, we're now on fire emotionally. We were elated. Something inside us lit up like a bonfire. We liked this guy. You know, we didn't want him to stop sharing the word with us. So we invited him into our house. We'd never felt this way before. Something special just happened on that road to Emmaus.
But instead of saying yes and coming over for dinner, he acted like he was going to just keep on walking, keep heading west.
Hey, we didn't want him to.
We basically begged and constrained this guy to stay for supper. He finally said okay and came in and sat down with Mr. Happy here as I prepared a meal.
See, Mary always had some sort of food partially prepared when we left home in the morning. You know, so that when we got back, you know, we'd be easier to fix something. So there's always a lamp lit in our house. So I lit up a few other lamps so we'd have some light in there. And Mary took to preparing. And this traveler guy and I just sat down and talked for a couple of minutes. Now, it was sort of nice, but I smiled when I noticed her beautiful smile again. I hadn't seen it in a few days. You can imagine why. And in fact, we hadn't even thought about the horrendous crucifixion for over an hour.
When the bread and wine was served, something happened that rang a bell in our hearts. We were stunned. This traveler then did something that only the apostles and a few of us would have known. Our new friend didn't wait for us to serve him. He served us. This was a bit different. I don't know where he was from, but this is not our culture. The host always caters to the guest, not the other way around.
See, what shocked us was our new friend picked up a small, warm, round loaf of flat bread, you know, and that Mary had set out for us. And he blessed it, he prayed, and then he broke off a piece for each of us, and he handed it to us with a little smile.
This scene seemed eerily familiar. It was exactly like what our son James, the apostle, had told us happened during his last meal with the Master.
You know, Mary and I looked at each other, you know, and we wondered how in the world this traveler guy could have known this. This guy did exactly what Jesus did at the Last Supper when he instituted the memorial. This man who had walked with us, interviewed us, shared with us every single verse pertaining to the Messiah from memory, the man we invited into our house, the guy we spent maybe 2 hours with, this brand new old friend.
All of a sudden he changed. He no longer looked like the traveler. All of a sudden we knew exactly who he was. The man we now see sitting at the table with bread in his hand was Jesus.
What just happened? I mean, 1 second there's the traveler guy's with us, and the next second we see, poof, Jesus sitting there. Now, how freaky is that? Just imagine if that happened in your house. Then he flashes one of his impish grins, because he was a lot of fun, Jesus. And he just vanished. Poof, he's gone. Sayonara, adios, see you later. And Mary and I sat there, bread in hand, in utter stupefaction. We were blown away, but we believed. It was unbelievable, but we actually believed. We believed. I finally believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. You know, it was crazy. Mary was right. She had been right. The ladies had been right all along.
I told you so.
I figured I would hear that. Well, the interview ended as fast as it started. Like I said, he just disappeared. You know, and he had surprised us when he walked up to us near the western gate of Jerusalem. And now He surprised us by showing us he was Jesus, and then he surprised us again by just vanishing. And we're just sitting there, bread in hand. How weird. Our hearts were on fire, though. Our hearts were on fire. Imagine spending 2 hours with the risen Christ. We were lit up. It was like all the lamps of our mind lit up at the same time. But why us? Why us? I still didn't understand why he chose us. Why did he spend so much time with us? Why did he appear and disappear right then is another thought. Why? Why didn't he stick around and talk longer? Why didn't he finish the whole memorial thing? You see, why when he broke the bread did he leave? Why? Why? I'm so sorry I doubted you, Mary. Okay. I'm so sorry I doubted you. And I'm so sorry that I didn't listen when you told me what had happened earlier. You know, so you have seen him twice today now, haven't you?
Yes, I did.
Well, I got to see him one time. Wow. Now that was quite an interview.
Cleopas, we better speed walk back to Jerusalem because Peter and the boys need to hear what we just experienced. Our stubborn son James needs to hear this too. They will believe us this time.
We'll see. Well, when we took off, when we went back that 3.5 miles, we got back to Jerusalem in under an hour, and I think I set a personal record, if I don't say so myself, and entered the place our son and the apostles were staying. Now, only 11 of the 12 apostles were present. Thomas was out doing something else. Don't know where he was.
Even Judas was there. I have my suspicions about that boy.
Me too. Before we could tell our story, a few of the apostles excitedly told us that Jesus had appeared to Peter. Now, some didn't look so convinced. Some of those guys still didn't believe even Peter. And there was no man to verify Peter's story. The women could, but hey, who believed the ladies? Now, other than Peter and the women, there wasn't yet another man who had yet seen the risen Christ until me. Until me. Mary and I looked at each other with that knowing glance of married people. And the moment Jesus disappeared from our supper, he was somehow, instantly, miraculously carried away to Jerusalem to meet Peter. Now you got to think of the timing of this, because it took us almost an hour to get back. So he disappeared from us, so he had that hour to get there and to spend time with Peter. It was mind-blowing to think that Jesus, in his resurrected body, could move faster than a speeding chariot. What could be faster than a speeding chariot? Wow! See, what I'm about to tell you is super important. His rising from the dead is still the single most important detail of the day. The problem was Jesus had to get all his apostles to believe that he rose from the dead, or else he could never lead them into that new birth he spoke about a few times. The resurrection is critical, folks. It's critical.
Well, it was now our turn. Cleopas and I finally had the apostles' attention. We finally got to tell our story. But from the looks on some faces, some of the apostles still didn't believe us, nor did they believe he was risen, besides us, and Peter, maybe a couple did. I'm not sure.
See, when we got to the part of our story, now we got to tell the whole story in the group of apostles and a few other people. And the ladies are there nodding their heads, and we're telling the story back and forth. But when we got to the part of the story where Jesus was where he prayed and he broke the bread and he gave it to us, just like Jesus had disappeared at that moment of the story, the moment we told them, the moment we got to that part of the story, Jesus reappeared. It's like he picked up right where he left off with us. Where he disappeared in our part of our story, he reappeared in that room at that exact second. Now, is that freaky or what? At that very second in our story, when we said he disappeared, poof, Jesus himself in all his glory reappeared in the middle of our group, in front of all his apostles, in front of the ladies, in front of us. Now that's crazy. Good crazy. At that exact same point in the conversation where he left our house is the exact moment he reappeared in the middle of the apostles and the ladies. In the story, I should say.
Talk about a showstopper. I don't even know what to say.
Well, I think I do. I think it was our job to try to help these apostles, our son included, help them get to the point that they all, every single one of the boys, can believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead and that he's still up. The reason they all had to believe that the Christ rose from the dead was so they could experience the new birth, receive the newly designed Holy Spirit of God. And it's going to happen in less than 50 days. Then they had to lead thousands of others into this thing called the new birth by getting them to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Now, I went ahead of myself a little bit there, but we know that the only way you get born again, as they call it nowadays, is to actually believe that our Lord Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That's step one, isn't it?
Yes.
It took all of 50 days, folks, and a total of 11 appearances in his new body for all Jesus' apostles to finally believe. 11 times he had to come back. Mary and I did our little part. Now it's time to close this out. I need to wrap it up. Now remember, we all lived and grew up in the same area of northern Israel called Galilee. We had known about each other for years and years. Our kids, now young men, grew up together, played together, traveled back and forth from Jerusalem together, year after year after year. Everybody knew each other's strengths. Remember when Jesus when he was 12, when he was traveling and his parents, after 3 days, they didn't know he was gone for 3 days? It's because he was hanging out with his crowd. These guys. Or people like them. You get it? Everybody took care of everybody then. We took care of everybody's kids. Kids of their ages would hang out. People who liked each other would hang out. Everybody knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. Jesus and his family were part of that tribe. They always had been. They were part of our tribe. We were all close.
We were family. We had real community. We had each other's backs.
I now know that the reason the newly risen Christ spent so much time with us, with Mary and me, was because he needed at least one respected man, a father figure, just not an apostle, to believe Jesus had risen from the dead. The women already believed. He needed someone that all the apostles would listen to that day because they all knew me. And that someone was me, that someone was us, actually. Right. Jesus knew me and Mary quite well. All the boys, all the apostles knew us quite well. Everybody knew each other. Well, it worked. That day we were able to help a few of them over the hurdle of believing that the Christ truly rose from the dead. But not all of them that day. You see, it took 5 dramatic appearances that day just to get some of the apostles to believe. Even seeing the Christ in his resurrected body didn't convince some of the boys. Even them seeing Jesus in his resurrected body did not convince some of the apostles that he had risen from the dead. It would take more than that. It would take more than just today. Dr. Luke has another great Jesus quote. Quote, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't be convinced even if someone rises from the dead." End of quote. Isn't that crazy?
It is.
Even if they saw somebody rise from the dead, they wouldn't believe it. You see?
To convince all the apostles that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, it took 6 more resurrection appearances. It took 11 appearances in all, but that is a whole other topic. Today we only talked about 5.
Now, I'm not sure why it was so hard to believe someone rose from the dead. Maybe because we'd known Jesus for years. Maybe because we knew his family. Maybe it was hard to believe because we're hard-hearted. which is probably more the case. Right. The risen Christ appeared 5 times that day. 5 times.
The first person Jesus appeared to was the young, faithful, and supportive Mary Magdalene. He looked like a gardener and then changed into regular Jesus.
Now, the next moments after he appeared to Mary Magdalene, he appeared to my Mary, and then Joanna and Simone and a few other ladies, and they held on to him like there was no tomorrow. He looked like the Jesus we knew and loved.
Third, Jesus, the risen Christ, did that undercover interview with me and Cleopas on the road to Emmaus. It was the second time I saw him, but the first time for my husband. He looked like an out-of-towner, a traveler, until he changed forms into regular Jesus.
Regular Jesus. Is there such a thing? Fourth, here's the 4th time he appeared. When we were speed walking back from Emmaus to tell others in Jerusalem that then Jesus appeared to Peter alone. And only Peter knows what he looked like, and he never told us.
And the 5th and final time Jesus appeared in his resurrected body, that day was when Cleopas and I raced the 3.5 miles back to the rented room to tell the story about our interview with the Christ. Only 11 of the 12 apostles were there. Thomas was out.
See, this time he showed pierced hands. He had holes through his hands and holes through his feet, pierced feet, and he didn't look all beat up. For some reason, he chose that form to appear in that room when I was telling the story. Now, besides Peter, this was the first time that any of the apostles actually saw Jesus in his resurrected body. This was the 5th appearance. This was the first time most of the apostles ever got to see the resurrected Christ. Even Judas saw him that day. Even Judas saw him that day. But Thomas wasn't in the room.
I'm not bragging, but that was the 3rd time I saw him today. Plus, he ate with us. Manja manj.
Hey! You know, what a crazy day. What an amazing God. What a multi-dimensional, multifaceted Savior. If you read Dr. Luke's inspired scrolls, you will notice that Mary's name is left out. And there's a reason. There's a reason, and I'm going to tell you why. Because God wants you to picture yourself walking and talking with the resurrected Christ and breaking bread with him. God needs you to be able to visualize the resurrected Christ so that you too can believe that he actually rose from the dead.
Yes, the big lesson of the day is for each of us to believe that Jesus Christ did in fact rise from the dead, and he's still alive and working to help us today.
Well, I hope you kids enjoyed this story about our interview with the risen Christ. What a day. What a time. You see, so this ends our interview with the risen Christ. God bless you all.
Trust in God, believe upon his promises. Through his word we can see his wonders, signs and miracles of his love.